Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Sabrina. I am a project manager at ECRIN, the European Clinical Research Infrastructure Network, who is hosting this meeting. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this third webinar on the sharing of best practices in complex trials organized as part of the CoMeCT project. This edition today will focus on the crucial topic of streamlining regulatory approvals of complex trials. Today's webinar will include 3 sessions, one on the use cases, challenges, and the feedback from the national competent authorities regarding the approval and amendment processes for platform trials, one on the regulator's perspective, and we'll finish with a panel discussion. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and that the recording will be made available on the ECRIN YouTube page afterwards. Slides will be shared with the attendees after the meeting, provided the speakers have agreed to do this. Without further ado, thank you once again for joining us today. I'll now hand over to Jacques Demotte, ECRIN's Director General, who will introduce the workshop and the CoMeCT project. Jacques, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. So I will share my screen as you did. This webinar is included in the activities of the CoMeCT project. The CoMeCT project stands for Coordination Mechanism for Cohorts and Trials. And yeah, it's better. And this project is about coordinating COVID trials. But now the COVID outbreak is completed, but the project is keep working as an anticipation of the partnership on pandemic preparedness and coordination mechanism for all the infectious threats. So the project is about coordinating the activity across Europe, strategic adaptive platform trial and cohort studies on infectious disease. Initially, it was a mechanism to coordinate the activity of the COVID platform trial in terms of scientific priorities, in terms of platform design, and also in terms of intervention arm, to make sure that the intervention arm were selected against objective criteria and were distributed between the different platform trials that existed at that time, meaning the Remap-Cap, the ECRAID-Prime in the primary care, the Discovery, the EU-SolidAct, and now the EU-PROACT platform trials in the funded by the European Commission. This also includes other activities, including sharing good practice, and this webinar is part of this activity of the work package 4 of the CoMeCT project about sharing best practice. A lot of experience had been accumulated during the past year in terms of interaction with competent authority, and it is the reason why we wanted to share within the consortium and also outside the consortium the experience of the COVID platform trial in terms of regulatory approval. So this is part of this work package 4. And in addition, one of the main activities in this project is to organize regular meeting of the so-called trial coordination board, the cohort coordination board, and the outbreak response board, which are 3 boards in charge of coordinating the activity. There was another work package called the JAM, the Joint Access Advisory Mechanism, run by the work package 2, but the activity now is over because it was focused on COVID activity. And I think with that, I'm done, and I will hand over now to you, Sabrina, to start the presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jacques. So we're going to be moving to the first session about the use cases, challenges, and the feedback from the National Competent Authority about approval and amendment processes for complex trials. And we'll start with the experience from 2 platform trials, ECRIN-Prime and Remap-Cap. And we'll start with ECRIN-Prime. It is my great pleasure to introduce Anette van der Velden. Anette is assistant professor at the University Medical Center Utrecht with a research focus on respiratory tract infections in primary care. Together with Chris Butler, she expanded the European Primary Care Research Network, now involved in 18 countries. As coordinating investigator, Anette runs various mainly EU-funded studies in these countries, including ECRIN-Prime, which we're going to talk about now. In addition to being a scientist, she's also heavily involved in trial implementation and management, together with an operational team at ECRAID and teams in the countries of the network. Alike, over to you.
Yeah, excellent. These are mine. So the topic this morning is a bit of background on the design and setup of the ECRIN-Prime trial, but mainly focusing on the regulatory approval procedures and mainly focusing on the CTIS system. Next slide. When we received funding for ECRIN-Prime, we primarily had two aims, and let's start with the first one, and that is the reason why we designed the platform trial, is to evaluate candidate therapeutic agents for the early treatment of respiratory tract infections. And by then we had to name them COVID-19 and COVID-like illness, but by this we actually mean respiratory tract infections as they present at the GP in the countries we work in. And testing these agents in an early phase evaluation, phase 2 or early phase 3, in a trial with a platform trial architecture. Second really important aim is to build a sustainable trial infrastructure for primary care in 8 countries as a key component of future pandemic preparedness. Well, why do we work in primary care? Primary care is where most patients with respiratory infections are seen and where care is delivered, as the pyramid shows. So treating patients there has high potential for reach and impact. However, there are logistical challenges in running trials in primary care. And to sustain trials in primary care, a platform trial was deemed needed. Next slide. Instead of only focusing on approvals, what are the necessities before starting a trial? Well, first of all, you need medication that you want to trial. And that is where the JAM, just mentioned by Jacques, was highly relevant to us. 2 compounds, actually 3, were selected for ECRIN-Prime. And these are shown here. Both are nasal sprays with a broad-acting antiviral activity. On the right is a nitric oxide nasal spray with some approval difficulties, which I will explain to you later, and LTX 109. You need a trial design with outcomes, proper plan for implementation the trial. What we desperately need are national coordinating teams in countries that help us running the trial in practices in their countries. We need sites, general practices where patients can be recruited, a logistical infrastructure for medication, for transportation of swabs, etc. So a logistical infrastructure, a master protocol, the intervention-specific appendices for the compounds you would like to test, all documentation in place, and then the approval process starts. Concomitantly with obtaining approvals, also highly relevant time-consuming task are the agreements that need to be in place with the teams in the countries that help us implementing the trial, the sites, and the other parties involved. From now on, I will focus on the approvals. So the next slide. Oh, now, a little bit of setup, ECRIN-Prime, a platform trial, as mentioned before, with the ability to test multiple IMPs in parallel or sequentially, building on a master protocol, outlining the overall structures of the trial with intervention-specific appendices for the compounds under evaluation. For this trial, we obtained approval via CTIS for 6 EU countries: Belgium, Ireland, Germany, Poland, Spain, and France. And for the UK and Georgia, separate approval procedures were needed. But that also allowed kind of comparison about approval processes and timelines in individual countries and via CTIS. So we started the submission with 3 intervention-specific appendices in addition to the master protocol: nitric oxide nasal spray, saline nasal spray, and usual care. And recently, and that's also interesting for comparison, a second major amendment for a new intervention-specific appendix, LTX 109. So in short, what is our patient pathway? Patients are recruited via GP practices, where clinical data are captured, where a swab is taken to determine disease etiology later on. Patients are randomized there. If randomized to medication, they get their IMP and move home and be ill there and hopefully recover soon. We do follow up via a 28 days diary. Patients self-swab at home, and then a mechanism also in place to get swabs at the location where we want to store them. Patients receive phone calls, and there is a final follow-up at 3 months. So just to give you some idea of the trial. Next slide. So the approval pathway, the first submission we did was for the NONS and the saline evaluation. And we had the design, all the documents, the sites with all information needed from them in place on the 17th of August 2023. Within the given timelines, we received a huge number of requests for information for part 1 and for part 2. The numbers are here, 73 and 164, with the strong advice to withdraw the application. And that is what we did the 24th of October 2023. What were the issues? The first compound, the nitric oxide nasal spray, is a CE marketed medical device. But as we wanted a platform trial for medication, we submitted this compound as an IMP. And 2 pictures of a cooling box and a fancy refrigerator. We had documentation in place for the CE marketed medical device, like a cooling box. But actually, if you submit for an IMP, you need documentation in place for an IMP and then a non-licensed IMP, because it was never submitted as an IMP. So documentation belonging to a fancy refrigerator, which was not in place. So most RFIs focused on the medication-related documentation. In the UK, the first submission was done on the 4th of October 2023, with much fewer RFIs, but also RFIs focusing on medication, but with a conditional approval in February 2024. So focusing now on the next slide on the CTIS timelines and further steps there. Okay, the numbers, much fewer in the UK. So this whole bunch of RFIs mainly focused on IMP related issues and then related to the investigational brochure and the quality IMPD. But also a lot of requests with respect to patient information sheets and informed consent. And these RFIs were highly country specific. So where one country wanted additions about data sharing, the other wanted additions about specifically about GDPR in their country. And it appeared impossible to have one master patient information sheet and informed consent form. So from that moment on, the only thing we could do to comply to all country-specific requests were country-specific patient information sheets and informed consent forms again. There was a lot about pregnancy testing, for which is a medical device, so many headaches there as well. Safety assessment, so we had to implement strict adverse event reporting, mandatory day 14 call, but also small errors at our end, naming documentation, redaction actions, what kind of signatures and what kind of forms site information, and coherence between master protocol and intervention specific appendix. Next one. Shows huge Excel sheets that were shared between the scientific team, the operational team, to start working on all RFIs and on all separate documents that needed adaptation. Next one shows, I think, the teams that, working on these IMP-related issues, just to show you what kind of activities and workload it appeared to be. So from one investigational brochure of 83 pages, we ended up in 2 IBs, and many more pages, and a quality IMPD of 43, a doubling in number of pages with additional testing, additional results, whatever. It was a huge team effort, as can be shown in the next slide. So we have a consortium working on this trial, but the bottom row of pictures are from the ECRAID operational team who are really guided and performed the CTIS submission, and we work in the countries with the pictures on the right. Well, how did it end with the CTIS submission? We did a resubmission end of January 2024 for CTIS, received a conditional approval in April 2024. But at that time, individual elements had changed, so we had to do another major amendment, which ran from May 2024 to full approval end of May 2024. So we started in August 2023 and received full approval in May 2024. So yeah, that was much, much longer than anticipated, and also much longer than promised to the EU when we started this process. So actually, patient recruitment was planned to start in 2024. Well, and that is what we did not accomplish. In the UK, a consolidated protocol with the CTIS protocol was submitted, and also ending in with full approvals May 2024. The next slide shows, I think, that the ethical and regulatory approvals in Georgia, another separate country. At each research institute, they have their own ethical board, and regulatory approval is being taken care of by the Ministry of Health. And when you compare countries, you see huge differences. And in Georgia, there is extreme focus on completeness of documents. So are all documents there, and not so much the content of the documents. Very much controlling on dates, abbreviations, zip codes of companies that do something with medication, naming of the companies with abbreviations. So very strict on text, but hardly any issues on master protocol of or IMP-related documentations of the appendices. So the submission was being approved in Georgia within 6 weeks. So that was a kind of easy go, but I also have to admit that we submitted to Georgia when documents were in perfect shape according to CTIS. So actually we did not expect many issues on, let's say, the most essential documentation. Next slide. So agreements can be a time-consuming process as well, but because the CTIS procedure was so time-consuming, agreements were not a hurdle anymore. And we have master agreements in place with the coordinating teams and with the sites, which are easy to amend for new compounds. Next one. Oh, that is an interesting final one, the approval pathways for the LTX 109, which is a IMP that is produced under GMP and trialed as an IMP before. The CTIS submission timelines are much faster here, partly because the team gained experience, but also because this really was an IMP. So we did a major amendment 7th of May 2024 with relatively few requests for information and easy to answer, with full approval in place early August 2025. MHRA in the UK was also really fast on this compound in combination with a new recruitment approach. Submission end of September, only one comment, and approval beginning of November 2024. So the team gained experience, CTIS gained experience, and with a proper compound, timelines can be short. The next one shows where we are with ECRAID-Prime. It's a bit an old one, but nearly 500 participants recruited. So the trial is up and running for the saline, the nonce, and the LTX, with its matching placebo being currently trialed. And I think this was the last slide. Yeah, the question, but that is mainly a question, I think, for the panel discussion: is ECRAID-Prime ready for a next pandemic? Yeah, I think we are ready for a next pandemic, and well, maybe more about this in the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alike, for this very insightful presentation. We will now move to Remap-Cap, another platform trial on COVID, but this time on hospitalized patient. This presentation will be done by Denise van Hout, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Denise, who is a medical doctor and epidemiologist working as a postdoctoral researcher at the Julius Center for Health Sciences, University Medical Center Utrecht. She wrote a PhD thesis in infectious diseases epidemiology and is experienced in collaborating with international researchers in large consortia. In our postdoctoral research, she uses data-driven methods to identify and quantify bottlenecks in the initiation and delivery of randomized clinical trials, including adaptive platform trials, both in the Netherlands and in multinational settings. She is passionate about creating a more efficient and harmonized research landscape for the future during health emergencies such as pandemics. Ultimately, with her work, she aims to improve the speeds with which patients get access to innovative treatments. Denise, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sabrina. So no need for me to introduce myself. Let me share my screen. There we go. Yes. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Denise van Hout. I'm very happy to be presenting today. I have no conflicts of interest to declare. And what I'll mainly be talking about today is Remap-Cap trial. It stands for Randomized Embedded Multifactorial Adaptive Platform Trial for Community-Acquired Pneumonia. It takes place all over the world, but I'll be focusing on Europe. Because as we all know, adaptive platform trials are great tools to answer research questions, because we can answer multiple questions simultaneously. We can adapt to circumstances such as an infectious disease outbreak. And that's also what Remap-Cap did. The trial originated already 20 years ago and adapted to the COVID-19 pandemic. There are currently 198 sites active in Europe, and maybe good to know it's a trial as said for patients with community-acquired pneumonia. It takes place in both intensive care units and wards, and the trial is still ongoing. And I put this in to show the conclusions that the trial has reached so far. I think there are many clinically relevant results, also because there were interventions that did not show any benefit, which is of course also important to know. And I think it's important to state that these findings really are a result of a large effort of many individuals, such as investigators, country coordinators, project managers, regulators, obviously, ethical committees, site staff. There's a huge amount of work that went into this trial and is still ongoing. But this does not mean that there were no challenges. And we really value continuous learning. So we wanted to look back at some lessons that we've learned. And we also value transparency. So we also want to be transparent about things we encountered. So with that in mind, we undertook some work to look back at the COVID-19 pandemic and comparing it with the trial before the COVID-19 pandemic. And we used operational data as endpoints. And I want to start with the largest hurdle and the most consistent hurdle that we encountered. It was the site contracting. So before, obviously before we can enroll patients, we need clinical sites willing to participate in the trial. So in total, from the beginning of the trial, we had more than 250 hospitals with a fully signed first contract. And when we compared the United Kingdom to all other countries, we saw that in the United Kingdom, the site contracting, the average site contracting time decreased dramatically with 97%, whereas in all other countries, so these were pooled for the statistical analysis, in the non-UK countries, there was only an 18% reduction. So you can see that on average, during the COVID-19 pandemic, it still took around 6 months before a new site could be contracted and activated. And obviously, this isn't something regulators so much can change, but it is worth mentioning that it is still a major hurdle for multinational clinical trials. And why is that important? I've put in this slide to show you it's unpublished data, the cumulative number of sites and opening of new domains over time. And you can notice the steep increase in the number of sites in the United Kingdom, where they did an amazing job in very quickly activating new sites for Remap-Cap, whereas in the rest of Europe, the activation of new sites was less steep. And the reason why this went so quickly in the United Kingdom is this, among others. So what I really appreciate there is that the chief medical officer early in the pandemic made the decision that we had a new pathogen and that ideally each patient had to contribute somehow to medical research because we didn't know anything about treatment, etc. So the chief medical officer prioritized 3 trials, of which one of those was Remap-Cap for the intensive care unit. And with that, it also, of course, has to do with the UK infrastructure, research infrastructure. They also implemented fast-track, non-negotiable contract templates. And that really helped in decreasing the time of the contract negotiations, which allowed sites to be activated and include many patients. So I did want to highlight that as a major lesson that we can learn from. So we also looked at some timelines more broadly. I've put this picture in, even though it's already a little bit outdated. So what we did, we analyzed the time from protocol submission to approval. And the nice thing about an adaptive platform trial is that you have many different protocols. So you can see those depicted here. And we looked at the time to approval of an identical protocol across different countries. So each dot is a different country. And this is all under the previous legislation, so the Clinical Trials Directive. So that's why I said it's already a little bit outdated, because previously the protocol had to be submitted in each country separately. And you can see that a single protocol was approved within a month in one country, and it took a year in another country. So the major step forward of the clinical trial regulation is that now the submission is harmonized and centralized. So we perform one submission for multiple countries. That and the timelines are fixed. So what we see here, all these different time to approval will no longer occur, which is a major step forward and major benefit of the CTR. Still, there are some opportunities to further harmonize. Also, as Alike just mentioned, within countries, there are still a lot of like country-specific requirements, for example, in informed consent templates or other statements that have to be made. So there are still opportunities to further harmonize the country requirements. So this is a major benefit of the CTR, the harmonized and centralized submission. There's also a new challenge that I would like to discuss and bring also to the panel discussion. I've made this plot to hopefully clarify this. This is the opening of new domains, new treatment domains over time during the COVID-19 pandemic, which you can see in the background in the Netherlands. So obviously during an infectious disease outbreak, timing of an intervention or a new domain is of major importance, because you want to be able to implement a new domain or a new intervention before a certain peak, right? Because you really want to capture all these patients. Well, in an adaptive platform trial, each new domain or each new research question, each new intervention is a substantial modification to the master protocol. Because yeah, that's the benefit of an adaptive platform trial. So as we think about future preparedness, it is worth considering if the current substantial modification pathway system allows such flexibility, because currently we cannot submit a new substantial modification while the previous one is still ongoing. So I'm talking about the Part 1 substantial modifications, so the larger ones, which might delay the implementation of new interventions in a trial. Because previously, in the Clinical Trials Directive, we could start up a new domain in one country while an assessment of an amendment in another country was still ongoing. But currently in CTIS or in the CTR, that's not possible. And at the same time, certain administrative updates, such as adding a new site or a PI change, is also considered a substantial modification. So it might be worthwhile to discuss if during a future pandemic, if we might need to develop a strategy how to incorporate these changes most efficiently. And I do want to highlight a very positive point from CTIS and regulators. We had a recent substantial modification number 4. It consisted only of PI change and new sites, and it was approved within a single week. So that's very, very encouraging. I have some conclusions, but I also want to mention some ongoing work, and because of time, I'll briefly mention the first ones. It's led by my colleague, Amos de Jong. He's gathering the regulatory perspectives on platform trials by analyzing the clinical trial applications of 5 ECRIN platform trials, and also developing a checklist for researchers. Because obviously there's a lot that researchers, trialists, site staff can do to optimize the clinical trial application. There's also a large responsibility for researchers to make sure the clinical trial applications are complete, and so that it really streamlines the clinical trial applications further. So to conclude, we had a trial ready. That's the major benefit of an adaptive platform trial that was able to change and adapt during an infectious disease outbreak. We do see that site contracting is still a delay in trial delivery. A major benefit of the CTR is that it reduces the differences between countries in approval times. There are still further opportunities to harmonize the country requirements though. And I would like to bring up, just as a point for discussion, whether the current one substantial modification at the time review, if it contrasts with the dynamics of an ongoing infectious disease outbreak and new research questions that arise, potentially limiting the responsiveness of APTs. And there might be value in discussing together if and how certain more administrative changes to the trial are handled most efficiently during future outbreaks, so that we can best use the benefits of a dynamic adaptive platform trial. So with that, I would like to conclude. Thank you for your attention. If there is anyone that would like to discuss further, feel free to reach out. The slides will be shared afterwards, and looking forward to discussing these points further.
Thank you very much, Denise, for this very interesting presentation. We will now be moving on to the experience of another platform trial, EU-SolidAct. This will be presented by Inge Christoffer Olsen. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Inge, who is a statistician and methodologist from Oslo University Hospital, and who is involved in several platform trials initiated by the EU Commission through EU Horizon grants. Inge, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sabrina, and I'm really happy to be here and present this for this very interesting workshop. So let me see if I can up my my slides here. So can you see my slides now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks. Yeah. So. Let me try to do this quite quickly. So let me share our experiences running the EU-SolidAct trial, and especially on the regulatory issues that we discovered. So very, very briefly on the EU-SolidAct master protocol. So the EU-SolidAct was designed as a platform trial to find treatments for for patients admitted to hospitals with SARS-CoV-2. We divided it into two parts, which were SolidAct Part A, which were on moderate disease, and SolidAct Part B on severe disease. Both these trials, these parts, we were randomizing patients to treatment or standard of care. Primary outcomes were occurrence of disease progression within 14 days for the phase 3 trial of the Part A, and occurrence of death within 60 days for the phase 3 evaluation of Part B, so the severe disease. We also had separate phase 2 outcomes that were hopefully slightly more responsive. We set up this as a tiered assessment of clinical information, where we had different levels that we were assessing. So at level 1 was the standard data capture. Level 2, we include also biobanking, and we had a level 3 where we could have add-on protocols. Important to say that we set up this protocol in close collaboration with the EMA, so that we should be able, and the aim was to provide the EMA with sufficient evidence for marketing authorization applications for the compounds that we were testing. So moving very, very shortly to the EUSolidAct trial, which so we ran 2 compounds at the end in this platform. And we ran baricitinib versus placebo. Actually, that was a requirement on top of standard of care, of course. So this was run in Part B, so in the severe hospital, in the severe patients. Primary outcome was 60-day mortality, and generally they were excluded if they were contraindicated to baricitinib, in addition to some other exclusion criteria. So for the information, so we submitted this, and the interesting thing here is that we submitted originally within the old regulations, so the Clinical Trials Directive. We submitted in 13 countries simultaneously. We used this voluntary harmonization process, and generally there were 158 days from submission to approval, of course, with a lot of requests for informations. Then we transitioned this to CTIS after the clinical trials regulation was implemented and the CTIS was opened. The transition itself took 48 days. And just for the transition, so the transition is a very, very thin process, actually. Then we just needed 84 documents. But when we did the first substantial amendment, we submitted almost 800 documents for this this substantial amendment, which then incorporates all possible documents that is needed according to CTR. EFPIA, similarly, we tested bemcentinib versus placebo. This was a phase 2 trial in part or in SolidAct A, which was moderate patients. Primary endpoint was disease state at day 8, and again contraindicated if excluded if contraindicated to bemcentinib. So this was, and while Boris of the SolidAct was actually one of the first trials to transition and move into the CTIS, the ECRIN-SolidAct was also a very new trial to be tested in the CTIS system. We submitted to 10 countries. Now it took 80 days to approval, so actually it's very much faster and about the same experience that Remap-Cap had. That, you know, while in the old system there was a large variation of time to approval, now it was much more consistent, and I think this is a massive improvement of the clinical trials regulation and the CT system. Again, a massive amount of documents, and this is of course because we are running in very many countries. So regulatory issues, and first of all, I have to say we had fantastic support from the regulators. We submitted through the Norwegian Medicines Agency, and they were then the reporting member state, and we had, of course, there were a lot of RFIs. I think our experiences was similar to the ones from ECRAID-Prime, although we didn't have the issues with we had proper documentation. Both our compounds were either drugs that were already marketed, or they had the proper documentation for the IMP. So we didn't have those problems. Of course, there were a lot of other issues, but some regulatory issues that we discovered were, we were discussing, should we submit this as 1 or 2 trials, or should we submit each of the arms as separate submissions, or should we submit it as, one platform trial? And this has been discussed also in a letter from or a document from EMA on questions and answers on complex clinical trials, and we were recommended then to apply as 2 separate trials, so that each arm in the platform is a separate trial, mainly for flexibility, that it's easier, when you have different arms in the same protocol. It especially because of this issue with the substantial modifications. Of course, then we had to repeat all the information from the master protocol in the sub protocols. This was a requirement from the regulators, that each of the sub protocols actually had to include all the information from the master protocols. There was also discussion, we had the master protocol, where should this one reside? We started out having it in BARI-SolidAct, but then BARI-SolidAct was closed before the ECRIN-SolidAct, then we had to move it to ECRIN-SolidAct. The question is how can we move this, and how can we properly reference it. We also discovered quite a lot of inconsistent requirements between member states. So some of the member states desperately needed wet ink signatures. Some said we do absolutely not allow wet ink, etc. And then we discovered, this issue with conditional approvals. So we got conditional approval, but we didn't actually know how we were going to submit the answers to maintain or to answer on the conditional approval. Should this be done as a substantial, or is it possible to do this as a non-substantial amendment? We were sort of indicating that it could be done as a non-substantial amendment, but CTIS didn't really have this opportunity. So we were sort of finding this out as we went along. And as was mentioned by Remap-Cap here, this substantial amendment, is a big hurdle. So it's not possible currently to do parallel substantial amendments. Also with this issue that actually in the CTR, it should be possible to open new sites, new countries, and submit in countries, but not submit part 2 documentation, just part 1. This has not been implemented in CTIS yet. So from discussion, this is my last slide. When we had to submit this as separate arms, is it then really a platform trial? These issues that we're discussing, and then the question is, okay, so if you actually do it as separate arms, is it then possible to combine control groups? These questions are, and how is that handled in a regulatory way? Substantial modifications, it was very interesting to see that Remap-Cap then, when you only had a substantial modification of the PI or sites, that you could do this very fast. I think this had to be done. And then this has to be, we have to trust that this is going to be the way, that it only takes a week to approve a new PI, for instance. And, the number of documents, it's just so massive. And I know there are work being done now to try to lower this amount, but it's a lot, especially when you're doing platform trials in multiple countries. Now we're setting up a trial in 20 countries, and the amount of documents, and each of the documents is not that much, right? So having a CV, for instance, but when you have 100 sites, that's 100 CVs. I think that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Inge. Very detailed presentation. We'll now be listening to the feedback from the national competent authority that was involved in EU-SolidAct's approval process. This will be presented by Anette Solli Karlsen. Anette, thank you for being here. Anette is the team leader for the clinical trial assessors and a senior clinical trial assessor at the Norwegian Medicines Agency. She has extensive experience in assessing clinical trials within different therapeutic areas and with different designs. Since the implementation of the CTR in 2022, NOMA, the Norwegian Medicines Agency, has gained substantial experience in the role of reference member state, and they contribute actively to the ongoing work of harmonization between member states through CTCG and ACT-EU. Anette, over to you.
And thank you for the introduction. Sabrina, would it be possible for you to share my slides?
Sure, we'll share that right away.
Yeah, just as a disclaimer, I would like to say that the issues mentioned here by me today are the view of the Norwegian Medical Products Agency and may not be representatives or shared by the entire EU regulatory network. So I will provide the perspective of the national competent authorities in the assessment of complex clinical trials, and for the purpose of the objectives of this meeting, I have tried to choose those topics that we find most essential for the purpose of streamlining of the approval process. So can I have the next slide, please? Just a brief background on how Norway fits into the EU clinical trial landscape. In the first figure to the right here, you can see the total number of clinical trial applications submitted to NOMA over the last 10 years. The last 5 years is kind of arbitrary. First, it was the COVID pandemic, and then the implementation of the CTR. So it's only from 2025 and moving onwards that numbers will be representatives. 1/3 of the application that we receive to Norway is non-commercial. So we have approximately 120 clinical trials submitted each year, which means that we are basically in the EU setting, not a very huge country. But in the lower figure here, I have tried to point out how we take our fair share of the as a reporting member state for multinational clinical trial. The work share represented in this figure is basically the number of RMS divided by the total number of clinical trials submitted to each member state. So you can see, you can find Norway here nicely in the middle with that 20% work share. So can I have the next slide? I will not go into much detail regarding submission strategies or accompanying recommendations for that. You can find linked here in the bottom of the slide the recommendation paper on complex clinical trial, which was published by the Clinical Trial Coordination Group in 2017. Thank you. In here, you can find recommendation for 2 strategies for the submission of complex clinical trial. The first option, or the first alternative A, is to submit the entire trial as one, with master protocol and associated sub-protocol submitted under the same umbrella with one EU CT number. To the right, you can see the second submission strategy where different sub-protocols are submitted as individual trials holding different EU CT numbers, but they may be related or linked through CTIS. Next slide, please. So to date, alternative B provides the best option. That is basically the option that allows operational flexibility to that trial. And this is primarily based on the current limitation in CTIS regarding the submission of substantial modification and additional member state procedure, which can only be done one at a time. I would also like to mention that if the sub-protocols are submitted under alternative B, this allows the appropriate time for assessment at an NCA level as compared to alternative A, where individual and new sub-protocol will have to be assessed under the time frame of a substantial modification, which is quite much shorter than for initial application. And the EU-SolidAct was submitted as 2 separate trials under alternative B. The master protocol was submitted as part of the first application and then was referenced in later trials. My key message here is to consider how the trial is to be conducted, how the data are going to be analyzed, and also the assessment process before you pick a submission strategy for your complex clinical trial. Can I have the next slide, please? We would also strongly recommend to have pre-submission scientific advice. Early engagement with the regulators will ensure that your application hold a high quality upon submission. Those discussions are important to decide on which information to put into the master protocol and which information to put into the sub-protocols. Also to ensure that the relevant information and all of the documents needed are included in the submission dossier, and also to ensure that all practical matters will be addressed regarding the authorization of the reference trial, management of modification to that trial, and also later addition and management of sub-protocols. So my key message here would be talk to your national competent authority. I would also like to mention that a number of authorities in Europe provide scientific advice to non-commercial sponsors with no charge. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. Another important feature when you submit a complex clinical trial is the selection of the reporting member state. And the reason why this is of particular importance for complex clinical trial is that they hold so many more layers as compared to regular clinical trial applications. So you need to be aware of that the choice of the RMS is important here. And at least if the trial is or the master protocol with subsequent sub-protocol are submitted under alternative B as separate clinical trial, you want to make sure that you have the same reporting member state for all of your applications. As you know, the RMS is proposed by the sponsor, but takes part during the first days of the validation process, which is shown in the figure to the left here. But the actual procedure is given in full in the figure to the right, which shows the complexity of the different stages that takes place here. And the bottom line here is that which member state end up as the reporting member state is an agreement between those member states that signs up as willing to take that RMS ship. So it is highly recommended that you talk to the National Competence Authority before submission, so that you they are prepared to take on the RMS ship and sign up as willing. Can I have the next slide, please? Also, national requirement, and it may be a surprise that this applies both to Part 1 and Part 2. Although the Part 1 are assessed under the CTR, and the assessment and national requirements should be harmonized, there is some language requirement that apply, and this may apply to the protocol synopsis, the labeling, the cover letter, and the protocol itself, also for some countries. Language requirements for Part 1 are found in Annex 2 of the Q&A document of the CTR, which is linked in my last slide. And I highly recommend that before submission, you go through that table. Part 2 is assessed at a national level. Use the national sources that is available for information. And these are listed in Annex 3 of the Q&A document of the CTR, where you can find links to national resources, and also contact the relevant national competent authority or ethics committee for clarification. And also in Annex 3, contact information is provided, both for the NCA and the ethics committee. So my key message here: align your documentation with the language requirements, and if additional requirements apply to Part 2, make sure that these are covered in the submission dossier. Next slide, please.
Yes, some final recommendation upon submission and post-approval. Establish and maintain a continuous two-way dialogue with the reporting member state. And this was one of the things that we learned was of greatest value during the assessment of the EU-SolidAct, to have a two-way dialogue that strengthened our understanding as an NCA of the complexity of the trial, and also contributing to building regulatory competence at the sponsor side. And you should be aware of that during the assessment, the reporting member state has a coordinating role. So even though it will not be possible to sort out when you get the RFI, which country that has raised the individual questions, the RMS has a role in providing or helping you, providing clarification on what is expected for revision during that process. So please reach out. To have a dialogue with the reporting member state is also important in the planning of future submission to ensure that the necessary and appropriate documentation is included, as already mentioned, and also for the planning of timelines for submission of new sub-protocol linked to previous submissions. And also a reminder to keep up with the notification in CTIS when the trial is approved. Otherwise, your trial will be listed as inactive and eventually expire if the right notification is not submitted. So also a key message here, maintain the regulatory requirements also after approval. And I have one last slide. Yes, thank you. So this is the recommended guidance with links to all of the documents mentioned here. Q&A document and recommendation paper, both applying to complex clinical trials, and some overarching documents providing recommendations for the CTR. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annette, for this extremely clear presentation. We'll now be moving on to the regulator's perspective. And for that, Monique will be presenting. Monique is a special advisor at the Central Committee on Research Involving Human Subject, CCMO, in the Netherlands. She's vice chair of the Clinical Trial Coordination Group, CTCG, and the co-chair of Med Ethics EU. She's a member of the CTCG Working Group on Complex Trials and was leading the drafting of the Q&A Complex Trials and CTIS. Monique, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sabrina. And this is what I want to present. I share. Just a moment. We are always struggling with. Okay. Here it is. Yeah, struggling with Zoom because we are not allowed to use Zoom. Okay, I can't see you anymore. I put it in presenter mode. Okay, I hope you can see it. Yes, I think so.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Not in presenter mode for
Thanks
now,
for the
but,
confirmation. I also noticed that we are running a little bit out of time because my presentation should end at this time. So I will try to do it in half the time I planned, so we have some time for the panel discussion. Okay. Next slide. This presentation is about the recently published Q&A on how to submit your complex clinical trial in CTIS. And this is recently be published, and maybe that's the reason why it was not in the overview of Annette. And I'm happy that I made this slide because people find it sometimes very difficult to find the appropriate guidances and Q&As and recommendation paper. We have a lot fragmented over different websites, but here is the website of the Clinical Trial Coordination Group. You can see it in the upper left link. And then
Is it okay if I interrupt you for a second? The slides are not moving. Would you like us to share the presentation on your behalf?
Okay, that would be better. Yeah, please do so.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I stop.
Apologies.
Yeah, okay. No problem. I have to go back to Zoom. Okay, yeah. And then I can say next slide. Yeah, next slide. Yeah. Okay. Again, I want to show you where the Q&A is. It's on the CTIS website. You will see the link, and then you go to the key document list, and then you see under the key document list also a number of other documents, but there is a section which is called Complex Clinical Trials. There you have the question and answers published in October. You click on it, and then you see the PDF as published on the right side. Okay, next slide. And the Q&A is primarily focusing on keeping oversight of complex clinical trials with the master protocol, many sub-protocols. And I think the concept of a platform trial or an umbrella or whatever doesn't change. We all know that CTIS is not accommodating the submission of complex clinical trials as we would like to have it. Therefore, we have lots of workarounds to manage all of this. But the concept of this principle of a platform trial doesn't change from a scientific point of view. At least that's my opinion about it. What is also important of keeping oversight is please use our naming convention. You can also find it on our website. The slides are being shared. You can find it, but please use it. We have a specific naming convention for master protocols, sub-protocols. Next slide. Okay, I think Anette already told you you can have a single application or a multiple application, and it's really up to the sponsor to decide how you want to submit a complex clinical trial. Anette shared some perspective on whether you decide for a single or a multiple. I think it also depends on the complexity of the complex clinical trial. I mean, the Remap-Cap was really complex with the domains and the intervention-specific appendixes, which was a strong interplay. Therefore, it was advised to submit it as a single application because of this interplay between the sub-protocols and the domains in this case. But also, we did some expectations on the number of substantial modifications and, of course, what will be blocking. But also budget was taken into account. If you have a limited budget and you have many sub-protocols, and if you have the same substantial modification, it adds to your costs for every protocol if that's the same. Anyway, many arguments for pros and cons, and please interact with the national contact point with the NCA to discuss what is the best way forward. Next slide, please. So the Q&A is divided in 3 blocks. Questions related to a situation where the trial is submitted as separate clinical trials, where it is a single trial application, and questions which are applicable for both situations, single and multiple. And of course, we didn't address all the questions. We only addressed most frequently asked questions. And first I go now to the questions related to separate clinical trial submissions. Next slide, please. And again, next slide. So, should the master protocol be submitted with each sub-protocol application? Again, we are talking about separate clinical trial applications. And I think we had not yet, until recently, an aligned position in the member states. Some preferred, some others, but now we come with an aligned position, and the answer is yes. The sponsor should submit the latest approved version of the master protocol with each new sub-protocol application. And this will only be for information. So the master protocol has its own EU clinical trial number, and this is where the master protocol is authorized. But to keep the oversight and to make everybody's lives a little bit easier, please submit the master protocol with each sub-protocol application. And yeah, if you have a substantial modification to the master protocol, you go to the application where the master protocol is authorized. I don't have the time to go everything, but everybody can read it if you go to the PDF. So next question. Next slide, sorry, next slide. So what should the sponsor do? If the RMS of the initial trial application, so that's the application where you have the master protocol and at least one sub-protocol with an IMP, is not a member state concerned in a new sub-protocol application. We decided in the CTCG that we want to have the same RMS for every application. So this is what the principle. But suppose the RMS is not a member state concerned in one of the sub-protocols which is being submitted separately, you should also include this member state in this application. So this member state can be selected in the RMS. You should always also propose, of course, this member state as the RMS. And since this sub-protocol is not conducted in the RMS, you have to submit placeholder documents, meaning placeholder documents in the part 2, which are empty, where you explain the situation. Otherwise, the RMS can't authorize this clinical trial in the member state, and you have an issue with your next substantial modification. So include the RMS also if it's not a member state concerned in a sub-protocol, and include placeholder documents in the part 2, similar to an Article 11 application, and then everything will go fine, I hope. Next slide, please. So sometimes you can have the situation that you have submitted the new sub-protocol and while the master protocol is still under review. And what does it mean for your new sub-protocol application? Well, you can submit then the master protocol version 1.1 with the new sub-protocol and clarify in the cover letter the situation that this is the version which is still under revision, but at least then we have made the connection between a substantial modification in the master protocol and the submission of this single sub-protocol. Next slide. I think I will not manage. Let's see. Yeah, what? Yeah. I think this one I will do. Okay, what should the sponsor do if a member state will be added later for only one of the sub-protocols? So that's the situation where a new member state wants to join the platform trial. This member state was not included in the initial submission. Well, you start your submission to add this member state to the concerned sub-protocol. And then in the second step, you add this member state to the master protocol application and explain again the situation. And the RMS will take care that this will be assessed expeditiously because you already have submitted the master protocol together with the sub-protocol. So everybody is aware of the content, and the master protocol application can then, with the added member state, can be authorized expedited. Okay, next one is about, this is an important one, I think, and it is the advantage if you have several sub-protocol submissions, and because we want to really have oversight on what is happening in separate sub-protocol submissions, you can indicate for every sub-protocol what was the start of recruitment and when was it ended. So this is really an advantage. So this is about the notifications of recruitment and end of trial. I go now to the next part. That's the section when you have a single trial application. Next. Here you can have a situation that, all member states are in, but you have a substantial modifications to a specific arm in this single application, and the substantial modification is not applicable for all member states concerned, and how to handle it. First, you should indicate in the cover letter and protocol for which member states concerned this SM is applicable, because it's not possible in CTIS to select specific member states for a substantial modification. And where it is a new IMP added, which is not used in all member state concerned, you should update the product section in CTIS, where you can indicate in the product section that which member states are not part of this substantial modification. There's a separate section where you can exclude those member states. All member states will receive the applications, only the involved member state will assess it, and the other member states have the option to go for a tacit decision or an active decision after the RMS has concluded the Part 1 SM. Next slide. Here, for a single trial application, then it's more difficult how to notify the recruitment status for the different sub-protocols. You can indicate the first start of recruitment, but you can't indicate it for which part of the for the intervention arm it is. So it's therefore very important that you send in an overview where every application on the recruitment statement. And if you want to, if a sub-protocol has ended for a particular part of the application, you have to submit a summary of results, but you can do that in the intermediate results section in CTIS. And just to be clear, this intermediate results section will not be published only if the whole trial is ended and you compile the whole set of results and you submit it in the end of trial summary of results that will be published in the public portal, but intermediate results will not. Next one. Yeah. Okay, I skipped that one. People can read it. It's more a little bit the same. Then the next one, which is applicable for all situations, single and multiple applications. So does the sponsor of the master protocol have to be the same for all sub-protocols? The question is no, you can handle it via co-sponsorship. Next question, next slide. The situations where the sponsor is not the product owner of an IMP, just as for all the other clinical trials, you can make use of the IMPDQ only a situation to protect commercial confidential information. And how to do it, I refer to the Q&A, question 2.15 in the Q&A about CTR published on EULEX volume 10. Next. And this one, I think I've said it already, but we just want to emphasize the importance of doing this, is that sponsors should submit an overview of the state of play of the complex clinical trial with each application. So an overview on status per sub-protocol, per strata, or status of intervention arms, dependent how the platform trial is set up, whether the arms are open, closed, or concluded, in which member states. Also, if the trial is part of the trial is conducted outside the EU EEA, we also want to know the state of play from the other countries. Of course, we don't need to authorize the clinical trial in those countries outside EU EEA, but we want to have them in part of the total overview. And again, a reference to the Q&A on complex clinical trial, where that is explained more in detail. And next slide. This is a question which we receive frequently if a sub-protocol is so you have a new sub-protocol in this master in this platform trial, but it's not conducted in the EU EEA, so only outside. And of course, you don't have to submit it, but again, you will include it in the overview what I just mentioned. Next. So, and what you have to do when a sub-protocol ends prematurely, then the advice is to submit it as an unexpected event or an urgent safety measure in CTIS, in addition to an updated overview of the status of the platform trial. And you can indicate in this notification whether the benefit risk has been changed or not. And I want to be clear also that any of this information of an unexpected event or an urgent safety measurement will not be published in the public portal. So also to ensure the data integrity of the clinical trial. I leave it to this. I think this was my last slide. I want to thank you. Sorry for the rush. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, then less than what I expected, but yeah, more than I hoped for in my time. Yeah, sorry, Sabrina, but yeah.
No worries. Thank you very much, Monique, for this very insightful presentation. We'll be now moving to the panel discussion, which will be a bit shortened due to the time constraint. But I want to take this opportunity to thank all of the speakers and all of the panelists for being here today, and of course the audience. Jack, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. So we have 10 minutes and we have 10 panelists, so I don't know how to share the workload. So just to remind you, we have the 5 speakers, Alike, Denise, Inge, Annette, and Monique. And we have 5 other panelists, meaning Stefan Goll from Charité Berlin, who is the coordinator of the Pearl Diver platform trial on major depressive disorder, Franz Koenig from Medical University of Vienna, who is a statistician and methodologist, Amélie Michon from ECRIN, Lada Leyens from Takeda representing the EFPIA, and Elmar Nimasgan from the DG RTD and the European Commission. So I will ask you to provide short answer. The first question I would like to ask, especially the panelists, is what is for you the biggest challenge we face with regard to the regulatory approval for platform trial, and do you have tricks? Do you have good ideas to ease the process? Maybe we can start with Stefan Gold.
Sure. I think I have a very short answer, although I have to say that our trial didn't really go through the CTIS submission yet, but we're considering that. So I think from what I'm taking from today is I think the one key issue we have to solve is that the separate trials is a workaround that only works partially, and that in our design wouldn't work because we're sharing control. So I think we have to find a way to make amendments in a single submission under master protocol more amendable to platform trials. That's the single biggest issue, I think, that's clearly hovering above our heads and undermining the principle of platform trials. The way it's now and the workaround doesn't work in most cases, I would say.
Thank you, Stefan. Maybe we can move to Franz Koenig. Franz, how are you?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Stefan has said. So if we share controls, how to handle the separate applications. And if we go for different CTIS application, for me, it's still unclear how to keep the master protocol, even if it's not part of, say, individual applications, how to align it if it has to be changed in one application for what reason, for whatever, but it might not be necessary for the initial application, how to keep the master protocol clean. This is not clear to me.
Thank you. Amélie?
Yeah, I would just echo what have already been said, meaning that having a sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, having a one application including all the new arms, and meaning streamlining the amendment process would be something really helpful.
Yeah. Lada?
Yes, and sorry for the strange lighting that I have here. I think we're very aligned. I mean, the parallel submission of substantial modifications, enabling that would be absolutely key. And the good news is regulators have heard the message and are working on it. So I hope to see something soon that goes in that direction. But also the submission of the CTIS under one application. And it's interesting to see Europe allowed this in the past, pre-CTR, pre-CTIS, inspired other regions to do this, like Switzerland, for example, and now is going back to separate submissions. So I would really encourage to move away from the workaround and find a solution for those two aspects.
Thank you. Elmar?
Well, on this particular point, I cannot provide an answer because we are not obviously submitting these kind of things. What I can perhaps do is to remind us that we do have the ACT EU initiative, where stakeholders from regulators, from sponsors, from industry, from really all relevant players are discussing, and as appropriate, perhaps this could be issues that would be sensible to be brought to that level. Having been around, both Jacques and I have been around for quite a while in this field, and I find really that having ACT EU and having this structured interaction amongst the relevant players, I do think makes really a difference, which is something we didn't have when the clinical trials directive came into play, and we really should make best use of it. Thank you. Over.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I think that the three main added value of platform trial consist of getting the option of having shared control arm, which is a way to contain the number of patients, to contain the cost also. This is not always possible due to the need for concurrent control and sometimes due to the route of administration. The second added value is to activate new intervention arms through amendments, and the third one is contracting. So it's true that if for any good reason or bad reason there is no way to activate quickly new intervention arms through an amendment, this is a challenge for the concept of platform trial in general. This is maybe not the case in all the jurisdiction. This was explained in particular by Alike and Denise. So do you have a feeling that the fact that, for instance, if you consider the number of platform trials run in the world at the present time, there was recently a systematic review run by the team of Matthias Bril in Basel, and most of them are run in the US or in the UK. Is the reason linked to the approval and the regulatory ecosystem, or is it another reason? Do you have the feeling that, for instance, in the UK, and I think the industry has also let's say experience in the US, is it easier to run platform trial in other jurisdictions?
Are you asking me specifically, Jacques?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it might have something to do with indeed approval procedures. I think that in the UK and in the US, funding systems are better. So national funding in the UK and in the US can be several millions of euros, and that is what it costs to do a platform trial. In multiple other countries, national funding is not that high, and I think that research infrastructures are often better in UK and US with more research personnel available. So I think it's a multifaceted issue.
Yeah. Okay. Lada, you have an...
I would agree. Maybe regulatory constraints play a role, but I wouldn't say it's the biggest role. And I think the investment and the funding may be one of the bigger, as well as the infrastructure, as was said. There is a workshop coming up at the Commission on research infrastructure, potential optimizations in Europe. So maybe this is a topic that could be placed there, and to see how the region can become more attractive.
And last question, maybe during the COVID crisis, we had the feeling that there was an interest in the SMEs to use the platform trial to test a new compound. This was presented by Alike, for instance. This was not the case for big companies. So what is the reason why big companies are not so interested at running clinical trials, at least in Europe, in spite of the fact that, for instance, there was the IMI EU-Pearl project to promote the concept of platform trial. The industry showed an interest at that time, but in practice, there are not that much participation of large pharma in the platform trial in Europe. Is it linked to the concept of single sponsor in Europe that prevents the industry to keep the full control over the execution of the intervention arm, or is it something different?
Thank you for the question. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Is it for me, Jack? Or
Yes.
Okay. It's a very important question, and as you said, we were very, very active in EU-Pearl, but we're also active in other efforts such as the Transcelerate effort that is looking into platform trials, co-sponsored platform trials. So I think platform trials from a single sponsor, we're seeing them run by industry. When it comes to multiple companies working together, there have been some very good examples like a pediatric trial in IBD, macaroni trial, and some others. But we are faced with different challenges like IP, the timing of each of the arms. Maybe one company has the asset ready earlier for the trial than the other. Data sharing is one of the questions, as well as having one company that may run the trial as the sponsor and then the other companies that join to provide the IMP. So there are different questions. It's quite a complex area that we are trying to tackle. And as I mentioned, EUPERL, Transcelerate, and other efforts that will be coming are trying to answer all of these questions. So not a simple one, but one that we're trying to address, Jack. And we are very interested in the concept indeed. And there are some areas such as pediatrics where the opportunities are very big.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. I think the time is over. I would have now to just thank the presenters, the panelists, and the organizer. And I think we had a very good presentation and series of discussion together. Thank you very much, and see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Thank
you very much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.